Dada! Dada! Dada!
The innocent voice rang through the gold-leafed halls of the penthouse, shattering the heavy silence like a hammer to glass. Little Jadon, only 12 months old, lunged forward from his mother's arms, his tiny fingers reaching out for the man who ruled the city with an iron fist. Parky froze. His mouth hung open in a rare moment of pure shock, his dark eyes wide as he stared at the baby boy reaching for him. He was a man of cold logic and colder violence, yet here he was, paralyzed by a toddler in a gray onesie. Yi's hands, usually steady enough to pull a trigger without a second thought, hovered in midair, caught between a reflex to push away and a strange, deep instinct to catch. Pamela Anderson gripped Jadon tighter, her own eyes filled with a mixture of terror and defiance. She stood in her crisp housekeeper's uniform, her heart drumming against her ribs. For a year, she had been a ghost in this house, hiding her true identity as the daughter of the very man Park Yi had destroyed. She was here for a reckoning, a calculated move to take back her family's honor. But she had never planned for this. She had never planned for her son to recognize the face of a man who was supposed to be his greatest enemy. On the wall behind them, the digital clock flickered. 47 hours and 59 minutes left. A war was coming to Seoul, a deadline set by a rival syndicate that would see this penthouse burn to the ground if Park Yi didn't complete a lethal merger. Yi was a man with everything to lose, and Pamela was a woman with a secret that could end them both. As Jadon giggled again, reaching for the silver chain around the Mafia boss's neck, the race against time shifted. The countdown wasn't just for a business deal anymore. It was for the truth. In 48 hours, the masks would fall. The only question was, who would survive the reveal? If you love stories where an innocent voice can bring a powerful giant to his knees, hit that like button and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments, which city or country are you watching from, and what time is it right now? This is the Daddy Claus. The air in the penthouse felt like it was being sucked out of a vacuum. Park Yi remained motionless, his hand still suspended in the air as if he were trying to touch a ghost. Jadon didn't care about the tension. He only cared about the shiny silver chain around Yi's neck. The toddler let out another squeal of delight, leaning so far out of Pamela's arms that she had to stumble forward to keep him from falling. Park Yi finally spoke, his voice a low, dangerous rasp that made the guards at the door visibly flinch. He didn't look at Pamela. He kept his eyes locked on the boy. He asked, "Where did you get him?" Pamela felt a cold sweat prickle her neck. She pulled Jadon back against her chest, her knuckles white as she gripped his small frame. She had practiced this lie 1,000 times in her head, but facing the man himself made the words feel like lead. She replied that Jadon was hers, and that she didn't have anyone else to watch him today. She apologized, promising it would never happen again. But Yi wasn't listening to her apologies. He stepped forward, the expensive leather of his shoes clicking sharply against the marble. He moved with the grace of a predator, stopping only when he was inches away from them. He reached out, not for the child's hand, but for his face. With a surprisingly gentle touch, he tilted Jadon's chin up. Yi's mind was racing. 12 months ago, his younger brother, the only person he ever truly loved, had vanished during a botched hit. They never found a body, only a blood-stained car near the river. And now, standing in front of him was a child who possessed the exact same amber-flecked eyes and the same stubborn curve of the jaw that ran in the Park bloodline. He turned his gaze to Pamela, his eyes narrowing into lethal slits. He told her that he didn't like coincidences, and he liked liars even less. He noted that the boy didn't look like her. He looked like a Park. Pamela felt the hidden identity she had carefully constructed beginning to crack. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was the daughter of Judge Anderson, the man Yi had framed to take over the city's legal district. She had come here to find the evidence to clear her father's name, using Jadon as her cover. But the race against time was now working against her. The digital clock on the wall shifted to 47 hours and 45 minutes. Yi stepped back and signaled to his lead security officer. He commanded a DNA kit to be brought to the penthouse immediately. He looked back at Pamela, a cruel, knowing smirk touching his lips. He told her she had 1 hour to tell him the truth, or he would let the science do it for her. And if the boy was who he thought he was, she would never leave this building alive. As the guards closed in, Pamela realized her first victory was a trap. She had successfully gotten into his house, but her son's innocent voice had just locked the door behind them. The digital clock on the wall pulsed with a steady neon red light, 47 hours and 30 minutes remaining. The countdown felt like a heartbeat, loud and insistent, thumping in Pamela's ears as she sat in the cold, white-walled holding room. Jadon had fallen asleep in her arms, oblivious to the fact that his mother was currently calculating how to commit a federal crime in the next 20 minutes. The door swished open, and the lead security officer entered, placing a sterile medical kit on the table. He didn't say a word, but the way he looked at her, as if she were already a condemned prisoner, told her everything she needed to know. He took the swab from Jadon's cheek while the boy slept, and then took one from Park Yi in the other room. The 2 vials sat on the tray, labeled and ready to be sent to the private lab downstairs. Pamela knew she had to move. If those samples reached the lab, the false victory of her hiding here would turn into a death sentence. The DNA wouldn't just show that Jadon was a Park. It would reveal that he was the son of Yi's missing brother, making him the only legal heir to the syndicate's fortune. In Park Yi's world, an heir was either a king or a target, and she wouldn't let her son be either. She waited for the officer to turn his back to log the data on his tablet. It was now or never. Using a trick her father, the judge, had once shown her about the blind spots in high-end security rooms, she leaned forward as if to adjust Jadon's blanket. In one fluid, desperate motion, she palmed a small spray bottle of high-concentration saline she had snatched from the staff medical cabinet earlier that morning. She didn't swap the vials. That would be too obvious. Instead, she waited for the precise second the officer stepped toward the door to hand the tray to the waiting courier. As he moved, Pamela feigned a coughing fit, stumbling slightly against the table. In the half-second of distraction, she misted the saline into the open collection port of Jadon's vial. The salt would degrade the sample just enough to make the results inconclusive. The officer snapped at her to sit down, his hand moving to his holster. Pamela sank back into her chair, her heart racing so fast she feared it would wake the baby. She watched the courier disappear down the hallway with a tray. 10 minutes later, Park Yi walked back into the room. He looked at Pamela, his expression unreadable, then glanced at the ticking clock. He told her that the lab would have the results in 3 hours. He warned her that if the results were tampered with, or if they confirmed his suspicions, he would find out. He then leaned down, his face inches from hers, and whispered that she was very brave for a housekeeper, but bravery was often just another word for stupidity. As he walked out, Pamela let out a breath she felt she had been holding for a lifetime. She had bought herself 3 more hours in this race against time. But as she looked at the security camera in the corner of the room, she saw the red light blink. She realized with a jolt of horror that Yi hadn't just been watching her. He had been recording the air density in the room. He knew something had been sprayed. The silence in the penthouse was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the air filtration system and the rhythmic ticking of the digital clock. 46 hours remained. The elevator doors slid open with a sharp chime, and Park Yi stepped out, holding a tablet. His face was a mask of cold fury. He didn't look at the screen. He looked directly at Pamela, who was clutching a waking Jadon to her chest. Yi tossed the tablet onto the sofa beside her. He told her the results were back, and they were a mess. Inconclusive. He explained that the lab reported environmental contamination, as if someone had intentionally compromised the samples. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her like a shroud. He told her that in his world, inconclusive was just another word for guilty. Pamela opened her mouth to protest, to play the role of the confused servant, but Yi held up a hand to silence her. He told her he didn't care about her lies anymore because the clock didn't care. The rival syndicate, the White Dragons, had moved up their timeline. They were no longer waiting for the merger signature. They were moving to strike the penthouse within the hour. This was the race against time turning into a sprint. Yi grabbed a tactical vest from a nearby crate and threw a dark, heavy jacket at Pamela. He commanded her to get the boy ready. He wasn't leaving them here to be killed by his enemies, but he wasn't letting them out of his sight either. He told her that if she was a spy, she was about to see exactly what happened to people who betrayed him. As they descended into the underground garage, the tension was suffocating. Pamela realized her hidden identity was becoming her cage. She had come here to take Yi down legally, but now she was being forced into the heart of a mafia war just to keep her son alive. She looked at Jadon, who was fascinated by the blinking lights of the armored SUV. He reached out his hand toward Yi again, whispering Dada under his breath. Yi's expression softened for a microsecond, a flicker of pain passing through his dark eyes, before he slammed the door shut. He barked an order to the driver to head to the shipyard. He turned to Pamela and told her that they were going to meet the people who took his brother. He warned her that if she made one wrong move, if she signaled anyone or tried to run, he would make sure she was the first one to fall. Pamela gripped the door handle, her mind racing. She had a burner phone hidden in her lining, a direct line to the federal task force. She could end this now. She could call in a raid and have Yi arrested. But as she looked at the heavy weaponry the guards were loading, she realized that if the police arrived now, Jadon would be caught in the crossfire. She was trapped in a loop of her own making, forced to protect the man she hated to save the child they both might actually love. The SUV roared to life, racing toward the docks as the clock hit 45 hours. The real war had begun. The shipyard was a labyrinth of rusted shipping containers and whistling wind, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of industrial floodlights. The clock on the dashboard of the armored SUV flickered, 44 hours and 30 minutes. Every second felt like a drop of lead. Park Yi stepped out of the vehicle, his presence commanding the space, while Pamela followed, clutching Jadon against her chest to shield him from the biting cold. As they walked toward a secluded warehouse, Pamela's heart skipped a beat. Standing in the shadows, flanked by armed men, was a man she recognized instantly. It wasn't just a mafia rival. It was Marcus Thorne, the very prosecutor who had worked with the syndicate to forge the documents that sent her father to prison. Her breath hitched. The hidden identity she was wearing felt like it was melting away. This wasn't just a gang war anymore. It was the epicenter of the conspiracy that had destroyed her life. Yi approached Thorne, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his weapon. He demanded to know where the shipment was. Thorne didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes drifted toward Pamela and the child. A slow, greasy smile spread across the prosecutor's face. He remarked that Yi had brought baggage to a high-stakes meeting, nodding that the woman looked strangely familiar. Pamela lowered her head, hiding her face in Jadon's curls. She knew that if Thorne recognized her as Judge Anderson's daughter, the race against time would end right here with a bullet. She felt Yi's eyes on her, sharp, questioning, and suspicious. He wasn't just watching his enemies, he was measuring her reaction. Suddenly, Jadon let out a soft whimper, reaching his hand out toward a necklace Thorne was wearing, a distinctive gold crest that belonged to the judicial office. The boy's voice was small but clear as he pointed and whispered, "Papa." The air turned to ice. That necklace was a trophy Thorne had taken from Pamela's father. Jadon had seen it in old photographs. The false victory of her silence was shattered by a 1-year-old's memory. Thorne's eyes widened as he put the pieces together. He began to laugh, a dry, rasping sound, and told Yi that he had been keeping a viper in his nest. He revealed that the housekeeper wasn't just a servant. She was the daughter of the man they had buried in a prison cell. Yi didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he drew his weapon, but he didn't point it at Thorne. He pressed the cold barrel against Pamela's temple. He hissed into her ear, asking if she was the one who had leaked his location to the White Dragons. He demanded to know if this entire year was a setup to get him killed. Pamela looked him in the eye, the fear finally replaced by a burning resolve. She told him that she didn't care about his war, but if he wanted to survive the next 10 minutes, he needed to realize that Thorne had already betrayed him. She pointed to the shipping containers behind them. Red laser dots began to dance across his chest. The warehouse was surrounded. Yi's grip on his gun tightened, his knuckles white. He was trapped between the woman who lied to him and the men who wanted him dead, and the clock was still ticking. The warehouse erupted into chaos before Park Yi could pull the trigger. A deafening crash echoed as a flashbang grenade shattered the windows, filling the space with a blinding white light and a high-pitched scream of metal. The red laser dots on Yi's chest vanished, replaced by the muzzle flashes of automatic weapons. "Get down," Yi roared. He didn't push Pamela away. Instead, he wrapped a powerful arm around her waist and tackled her behind a heavy steel crate, just as a hail of bullets shredded the space where they had been standing. Pamela huddled on the cold concrete, covering Jadden with her own body. The toddler began to cry, the sound heart-wrenching against the thunder of gunfire. Yi was pressed against the other side of the crate, his jaw set, firing back with lethal precision. Between shots, he glanced at the digital timer on his wrist. 43 hours and 45 minutes. The merger deal was being torn to pieces, and his men were falling in the shadows. Thorne's voice drifted over the noise, amplified by a megaphone. He told Yi to give up the girl and the boy, promising that if he handed over the daughter of Judge Anderson, Yi could walk away with his life and his empire. Thorne revealed the truth. The White Dragons weren't just rivals. They were a cleanup crew hired to erase every witness to the judge's framing, including Jadden. Yi looked at Pamela. The masks were off. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw the fierce maternal protection she had for the boy. For the first time, he didn't see an enemy or a servant. He saw the only family he had left. He realized that if Jadden truly carried his brother's blood, this wasn't just a housekeeper's baby. This was the last piece of his soul. He leaned in close, the scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne filling Pamela's senses. He told her he was going to create a diversion. He pointed toward a narrow service tunnel near the back of the warehouse that led to the docks. He handed her a spare handgun and a set of keys to a speedboat. He told her to run and not to look back, no matter what she heard. Pamela stared at him, stunned. She asked why he was helping her after she had lied to him for a year. Yi didn't smile, but his eyes softened for a fraction of a second. He told her that he had spent his whole life winning, but he was tired of winning the wrong wars. He whispered that she should take the boy and get out of here. As Yi stood up to draw the fire of a dozen gunmen, Pamela felt a sharp pang of realization. She had finally escaped his grasp, but the victory felt hollow. She was terrified of losing the man she had spent months trying to destroy. She gripped Jadden tight and sprinted for the tunnel, the clock ticking down to 43 hours and 30 minutes. The race wasn't just against the rivals anymore. It was a race to see if any of them would make it out of the shipyard alive. The cold harbor air slapped Pamela in the face as she burst through the exit of the service tunnel. Behind her, the warehouse was a symphony of destruction, explosions and the staccato rhythm of gunfire fading into the distance. She reached the edge of the dock, the speedboat bobbing violently in the dark, churning water. Jadden was shivering, his small face tucked into her neck, his quiet sobs muffled by the heavy jacket Yi had given her. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped them into the black abyss below. The engine roared to life, a powerful vibration that hummed through the floorboards. She looked back at the warehouse. A pillar of fire erupted from the roof, lighting up the sky in a hellish orange glow. She knew Park Yi was still in there. He was fighting a war on two fronts, standing alone against Thorne's mercenaries so she could have these few precious seconds of a head start. The clock on the boat's dashboard glowed, 43 hours and 20 minutes. She had the key, the boat, and the open sea. This was her chance to disappear, to take Jadden and flee to a country where the name Park Yi meant nothing. But as she gripped the steering wheel, she looked at Jadden. The boy wasn't looking at the water. He was looking back at the fire, reaching out a tiny hand as if he could pull the man he called Dada out of the flames. Pamela realized then that she couldn't leave. If she left now, she wasn't just escaping a mafia boss. She was leaving her son's father to die in a trap she had helped set by bringing her past to his doorstep. She slammed the boat into reverse, the hull screeching against the wood of the dock. She wasn't running away. She was going back. She grabbed the handgun Yi had given her, checking the magazine with a grim focus she had inherited from her father. She navigated the boat toward the far side of the shipyard, where the warehouse overhung the water. If she could get beneath the floorboards, she could create a second exit. Suddenly, a searchlight cut through the darkness, pinning her to the deck. A second boat, filled with Thorne's men, screamed toward her from the main channel. They weren't interested in capturing her anymore. They were here to sink her. Bullets began to spray the water around the speedboat, sending plumes of icy spray into the air. Pamela ducked, shielding Jadden with her body as she pushed the throttle to its limit. The race against time had just become a high-speed game of life and death on the water. She had 43 hours left to save a legacy she once wanted to destroy, and the only man who could help her was currently surrounded by fire. The spray of the ocean was like needles against Pamela's skin as she steered the boat in a sharp, lunging curve. Behind her, the mercenaries' vessel gained ground, its engine a low, predatory growl. She looked at the dashboard clock, 42 hours and 50 minutes. She had less than 10 minutes to reach the warehouse's underside before Yi was completely overrun. She spotted the massive concrete pylons supporting the rear of the shipyard. With a desperate yank of the wheel, she drifted the speedboat under the low-hanging shadows of the pier, the roof of the warehouse just inches above her head. The pursuit boat roared past, their searchlights missing her by a hair's breadth in the darkness. Pamela killed the engine. The only sound was the lapping of water against the hull and the muffled thuds of combat happening directly above them. She looked up at the wooden slats of the floor. Dust and debris filtered down through the cracks every time a heavy footstep or an explosion rocked the building. She stood up on the seat, holding Jadden securely in a sling against her chest. She found a loose maintenance hatch, rusted and heavy. Using the butt of the handgun, she hammered at the latch until it gave way with a groan of protesting metal. She climbed through, pulling herself and the baby into the smoke-filled darkness of the warehouse's storage level. The scene above was a nightmare. Park Yi was pinned behind a fallen steel beam, his suit torn and stained with blood. He was down to his last magazine, and Thorne's men were closing in from 3 sides. Thorne himself stood near the entrance, a cruel look of triumph on his face. He called out to Yi, telling him that his empire was gone and his brother's bloodline would end tonight. Yi didn't respond. He simply closed his eyes for a second, his hand resting on the silver chain Jadden had reached for earlier. He was prepared to go out in a final, violent stand. But then the floorboards behind him creaked. Pamela stepped out of the shadows, her silhouette framed by the smoke. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She aimed the handgun at the overhead fire suppression valves and fired 3 perfectly placed shots. A wall of high-pressure water and chemical foam erupted from the ceiling, instantly blinding Thorne's men and dousing the flames. In the confusion, Pamela reached Yi's side, grabbing his arm. She whispered into his ear that Dada wasn't allowed to leave them yet. Yi looked at her, shock flickering in his eyes before turning into a fierce, rekindled flame of survival. He grabbed a dropped rifle from the floor. The clock hit 42 hours and 40 minutes. They were no longer just running, they were fighting back as a team. The warehouse was filled with a thick, white chemical fog that tasted like salt and iron. Thorne's men were stumbling, coughing, and firing blindly into the mist. Park Yi moved like a shadow, his movements synchronized with Pamela, as they retreated toward the maintenance hatch. He held the rifle with a grim intensity, clearing a path while Pamela kept Jadden shielded behind his broad shoulders. The clock on Yi's wrist pulsed a violent red, 42 hours and 20 minutes. They reached the edge of the storage level where the floor dropped off into the dark water below. But before they could descend, a familiar, cold voice sliced through the chaos. Marcus Thorne stepped out from behind a stack of crates, his gas mask making him look like a monstrous insect. He wasn't looking at Yi. He was looking at the child. Thorne leveled his weapon and shouted for them to stop. He told Yi that he was a fool for protecting a child that wasn't even his. He laughed, the sound distorted by the mask, and revealed the final, jagged piece of the puzzle. He told Pamela that her father, the judge, hadn't just been framed for money. He had been framed because he found out the truth about the Park family bloodline. Yi's grip on his rifle tightened. He demanded to know what Thorne was talking about. Thorne stepped closer, his finger hovering over the trigger. He revealed that Yi's younger brother hadn't died in a random hit. He had been eliminated by the very syndicate Yi served because he had fathered a child with a woman the elders didn't approve of, a woman who was Pamela's secret sister. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Pamela felt the world tilt. Jadden wasn't just a child she was protecting for revenge. He was her own nephew, the last living link to her sister, and the man Yi had loved most in the world. The word Dada wasn't a mistake or a toddler's confusion. Jadden had spent the first few months of his life hearing his father talk about Big Brother Yi. The child hadn't been calling Yi his father. He had been calling him by the only title he knew for the man who looked just like the dad he lost. Yi's face transformed. The cold, calculating Mafia boss vanished, replaced by a man consumed by a protective rage so pure it was terrifying. He didn't fire his gun. He lunged. The two men collided in a blur of motion. Thorn fired, the bullet grazing Yi's shoulder, but Yi didn't flinch. He disarmed Thorn with a brutal efficiency, pinning him against the edge of the platform. Yi looked Thorn in the eye and told him that he had spent his life building a kingdom for people who murdered his family. He whispered that the race against time was over, and Thorn was out of seconds. With a final, powerful heave, Yi sent Thorn plummeting into the churning black water of the harbor below. The clock hit 42 hours. The immediate threat was gone, but the real battle for Jadden's future was just beginning. Yi turned back to Pamela and the boy. He reached out a blood-stained hand and gently touched Jadden's cheek. For the first time, he spoke to the child directly. He promised that from this moment on, nobody would ever have to hide again. The morning sun began to bleed over the Seoul skyline, turning the glass towers into pillars of gold. Inside the penthouse, the digital clock finally reached its end. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. The 48-hour race was over. Park Yi stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, no longer wearing the tactical vest or the blood-stained suit. He looked at a document on the table, the finalized merger. But this wasn't the deal he had started 2 days ago. Using the evidence Pamela had gathered during her year as a housekeeper, Yi had systematically dismantled the corrupt elders of his own syndicate. He had used his power to bring the giants to their knees, just as Pamela had once dreamed of doing. The merger wasn't a surrender, it was a total takeover. Yi was now the sole head of a new legacy, one built on the truth rather than the lies that had killed his brother and ruined Pamela's father. Pamela stepped into the room, dressed not in a uniform, but in a sharp, elegant suit. She held a folder containing the full exoneration of Judge Anderson. The hidden identity she had carried for so long was finally gone. She was no longer a shadow in Yi's house. She was the architect of its new foundation. She looked at Yi, the man she had come to destroy, and realized that in the heat of the fire, they had forged something neither of them expected. Jadden toddled across the thick cream carpet, his laughter filling the once silent room. He stopped at Yi's feet and looked up, holding out a small wooden toy boat. With a wide, toothy grin, he spoke the word again, but this time it didn't feel like a mistake. Dada. Yi knelt down, picking up the boy and settling him against his shoulder. He looked at Pamela and told her that the clock would never start against them again. He promised that Jadden would grow up knowing exactly who his father was, and exactly how much he was loved by the people who fought to keep him safe. The daddy clause was no longer a secret or a threat. It was a promise. As the city woke up below them, the three of them stood together, a family born from a lie, proven by fire, and bound by a truth that could never be broken. If you loved this journey from secrets to survival, make sure you've hit that like button and are subscribed so you never miss a story of power, mystery, and heart. Thank you for watching The Daddy Clause. We will see you in the next one.